Shavua Tov, Katvach. Baruch Hashem, we are going to have our last class. We're up to the last bracha in the Shemoneh Esrei, the Shalom. And that's corresponding with the last of the birds that are not kosher in the Torah, which is the atalef, classically identified as the bat. And we had a long journey over here. It's really exciting to be by the last one. Hopefully we'll have a nice takeaway. So let's just look into a little bit about Shalom, and we'll bring it back to the bat. Where do you see the symbolism of Shalom, of peace, in a bat? And from there, I hope to summarize the brachos from beginning to end, and hopefully a short summary of all the different classes that we had over the last 2 or 3 months. Let's begin with Shalom. So we have over here the last bracha before we depart from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God, is we ask for peace. Now, peace, if we would try to search for an expression, extreme expression of peace that can express the idea of peace deeply. Where do you see it? Where do we see it? Our day-to-day life. And the truth is, a great expression of it is in a moral marriage relationship. If there's a harmony in a relationship, in a marriage relationship, and it's moral, it's morally correct, that's an expression of Shalom, of peace. What is that? 2 different forces, 2 different interests, people of interest that are come together, and even in their foundation, they're different. But they join together in harmony and love, and you come out with Shalom. That's an expression of Shalom. Often we find many words in Chazal speak of the strong expression of Shalom in marriage, but the message and the symbolism of all of them is that 2 very different goals or objectives or forces are balanced. We're not just coexisting together in the same space, but they're literally living off each other. They literally live off each other, and that's exactly what Shalom is. That's peace. I remember seeing once in the Sefer Baruch Shalma, written by the Torah Tamima, son of the Aruch HaShulchan. Right? He points out that in the Misha Berach we say on the Shabbos, or even during the week, for the choila, for the sick, we ask the Kadosh Baruch, we ask God to give refuah from min hashamayim. Right, what's the expression? Hold on. Misha Beirach, hu yivarech v'rapes ha'chol ba'avor, HaKadosh Baruch Hu yimalei rachamim, v'yishlach lo mehira refuah shleimah min hashamayim. Hashem should send quickly, speedily, refuah min hashamayim. So the expression min hashamayim, we understand, is from heaven, is from God. That's where we recognize, we perceive God and the spirituality. But we don't use that expression often in other places in tefillah, and wherever we do, it's still a question. Why there's got to be something about this Misha Berach, and wherever we use it, that you could ask the question, why do we specifically express the spiritual Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, as min hashamayim? So he points out that Rashi in the beginning of Bereshit says the Shemayim is actually a combination. God took ish and mayim, hence the name Shah Mayim. The shin is the ish, is the fire, and mayim, the water, and brought them together. And there was a perfect balance, because really ish and mayim can't coexist in the same space. But there was a perfect balance Kadosh Baruch Hu, God gave, and it was able to create Shemayim with it. And he says that's really what's happening in every human being that's alive, the physical sense, the physical life of a human being. Right? There's different yisodos, different foundations, the 4 different foundations God put together for man to exist. You have the ruach, and you have, first of all, Kadosh Baruch Hu to go offer to the dirt. You have the ruach, you have the mayim in the man, and you have the ish. There's the temperature, and the different aspects. In order to coexist, a man should exist, there has to be a balance, a perfect balance. When chas v'shalom, lo aleinu, a person is sick, he has a bad fever, so then the ish is too strong. It could go the other way. The ish is too small, is too low. And there you have an imbalance. So we say the same min hashemayim, same min hashemayim that Kadosh Baruch Hu created a shemayim, a heaven, that has the existence of the ish and the mayim in the perfect balance, right? Opposite in their essence, but perfect balance could have shalom, could have peace. So too, this chola, the sick man, the sick woman, should have a similar tikkun, fixing that there should be a perfect balance away from the imbalance that's occurring. So back to the bayis, that's shalom, right? So he says a few different interesting sources for this idea. We have, first of all, in Parshas Pinchas, right? The end of Balak and beginning of Pinchas, what was the story? There was the Zimri and Kozbi. They had this relationship, and this illegal relationship, that Zimri went ahead and took this non-Jewish woman, and who stood up? Pinchas. Pinchas stood up against it, and this immoral relationship. And what is he awarded with? What is it? Pinchas gets shalom, gets peace. What's pshat? Why? He's protecting the perfection of what shalom really is, what peace. You know, that appeared as Kozbi and Zimri, they were having this harmony, this peace, right? Intermarriage. But the reality is that illegal, immoral relationship is actually a imperfect shalom. It's impeding on what shalom really is. So he protected what the perfection of shalom is, and therefore he was awarded with the expression of shalom. Interesting also, Rav David Heller here, Yeshua Heller, he points out that I never actually seen this in practice, but apparently there's a minhag, there's a custom in some places to respond to the third bracha of Berchas Kohanim. So apparently in certain circles, each of the three brachos, each of the three blessings corresponds to the three of the avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and in each one they say Amen, Kein Yiratzon, which that we're familiar with, but some circles add in Kein Yiratzon Bizchus Avraham in the first one, in the second one Bizchus Yitzchak, and the third one Bizchus Yaakov. Kein Yiratzon Bizchus Yaakov, and the Zuchus and the merit of Yaakov. So there should be what? What's the third one? We end off with Shalom, peace. And we know that between all the three of us, we can look at Yaakov. Chazal, the rabbis, they tell us that Yaakov is called mitaso shleimah, right? His mita was complete. All his children, all of his offsprings were all complete and tzaddikim, righteous. All 12 shvatim, all the 12 tribes. When it comes to Avram and Yitzchak, we know that there was this imperfection in that relationship. There was an imperfection which had to be pushed aside. Yishmael and Esav. It wasn't mitasam shleimah. It wasn't complete. It wasn't that full level of shalom. Yaakov had that shalom, a perfect shalom, perfect peace. And then he points out that Yaakov, there's a verse, right, beginning of Vayeshev, says, Elo told us Yaakov Yosef. Right, these are the children of Yaakov Yosef. Now, the commentators are very bothered. These are the children of Yaakov, Yosef. Yosef is one of them. What about all the other ones? So there's different. We're familiar with the more famous ideas. Rashi says maybe there was a more of a relationship connection between Yaakov and Yosef. Yaakov gave over to Yosef. We know everything that Rashi says in the beginning of Parshas Vayeshev. But he says over here that within the idea he's saying, there's a much deeper idea. And that is that we've already spoken about in the past. Yosef, it's called Yosef HaTzaddik, Yosef the righteous. Why? So there's a Zohar. The Zohar tells us that the word tzaddik, adjective tzaddik, is reserved for those that stay true to morality within the idea of erva, right? So Yosef stayed true to, he fought against his taiva, his interest, the Yetzer Hara. When it comes to the wife of Potiphar, he stayed away from that immorality. And therefore he's called Yosef HaTzaddik. It's not just Eshet Potiphar, that was one example, but the whole Mitzrayim, we know, the rabbis tell us, Mitzrayim was Shtufei Zima, they were full of Zanus and Arayot, all those issues. And Yosef was living literally there alone, and he didn't fall into the temptations. So Yosef HaTzaddik, so Elo told us Yaakov has mitaso shleimah. He has full shalom within this idea of morality, in the relationship, in marriage. He had shleimut. He had completeness. And that's where we find, in which of his children do we find that spelled out Yosef? Yosef is Yosef HaTzaddik, living in Mitzrayim and not falling to the wayside. And there he goes, and Dr. Rishua, before we get back to the bat, he brings one more. There's a Gemara Brachos, such an interesting Gemara. And he brings out this idea, and he deepens it one level further. And that is, Gemara says, right in the beginning of Brachos 3a, Gimel and Aleph, that there are three mishmarot. There's really a question in the Gemara, discussion of his 3 or 4 mishmarot, guards in the night. Split the night into 3 or 4. So we're working with the opinion that there was 3. The Gemara tells us that opinion says there's 3. Right, we take the 12-hour night, 12 halachic hour. Let's say just for the sake of this class, 12 halachic hours. So we've got the 4, 4, and 4. Right, each portion is 4 hours. The first third of the night, the first 4 hours, the Gemara tells us that the donkey is braying. The first third of the night. Second third of the night, we have the dogs are screaming. And the third of the night, the last 4 hours, Ha'isha misaperes im bala vatinok yonek, from the mother. A wife is speaking to the woman speaks to her husband, and the child nurses from the mother. And Rabbi Segal tells us that the deeper meaning of this Gemara is that the 3 portions of the night actually correspond to the 3 of us, the 3 forefathers. The first one is Avraham. The donkey, where do we find by Avraham? So we have in the imperfection in the child of Avraham. Ishmael, we find the verse, has Ishmael put together with the donkey. Im Hadom Lechamar. Right? Avraham tells Ishmael, really, Eliezer and Ishmael, who came with him to the Akedah, they say, you're going to wait here on the bottom of the mountain, I'm going to go up with Yitzchak to the top of the mountain, and you'll stay here ima chamor, with the donkey. There's a relationship. The Gemara always tells us that Eliezer, servants, have this relationship. We put them in the same list as a donkey in regards to Kedushin, that there's no Tvisas Kedushin. We won't discuss that right now, but the donkey also here is put with Ishmael. Ishmael was also there. So we're not going to focus on this right now, just to get to the end of this Gemara. The second third of the night is the screaming of the dogs. We've mentioned in the past, the Zohar tells us those dogs are what? They symbolize Amalek. Amalek comes from Esav. Esav is the imperfection of Yitzchak. What do we have by the third of the night? That's what we want to focus on now, is Yaakov, the third of the Avos. A woman is speaking to her husband. What's the symbolism here? The relationship, the harmony relation of Shalom, of peace. 2 forces here, 2 different interests. A woman and a man, as we'll say, Chachma, Bina, right? They're coming together, and she's speaking in harmony. And then we have this deeper idea, which he says is what? Gemara tells us a child is nursing for the mother. What is that supposed to symbolize? So Yeshua Heller takes us on a interesting, fascinating idea. The Gemara tells us in Maseches Nida that there's a fascinating reality that exists in the nursing of a child. What is that? So we know, scientifically, right, when the fetus is in the mother, so all the nutrients that allows for the baby to exist and to grow is going through the blood flow of the mother. The baby's born, and now how does the baby exist? By nursing from the milk of the mother. So the Gemara says this expression of dam necher v'nasa cholav, the blood that was there until now giving nutrients to the baby, changes into milk. Right? We could see in a symbolistic way, there's a change from the blood is now being changed into milk. So what is that supposed to symbolize? So he tells us it's supposed to symbolize chet turning into teshuvah, to kapara. Right? The chet is red. Right? We have the color red is like chet. We have in different verses. And it turns into white. Says the if your sins will be like red, they'll turn white, like snow. So, what does that have to do with Shalom? This is an expression, and this is the highest level of Shalom, he says, right? The Pasuk says that children, right? The song that we sing by the Shalom Zohar is what? When you have children, there'll be Shalom al Yisrael. There's peace. What's the relationship? So he tells us that the idea of a child nursing from the mother, we put it in the form of Torah. What is it? We could see it in the Torah. We could say that the Torah, which is a product of God's das, right? The Torah is a product of the knowledge of God. And God gave us that knowledge, to give it to man, as we had in last week's parasha in Yisro. God came to Har Sinai, He gave the Torah to us. That's a product of His das. And we have it in the Torah. And that das actually has two expressions. We have the Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, and Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah. The Torah Shebechsav is what we could call Chachma. We mentioned this back in the bracha of Atachonein. It's the Chachma. It's the wisdom. What's the wisdom? It's the creative aspect. Right? When one has an idea, a new idea, that's called Chachma, is wisdom. You have the Torah Shebal Peh, it's Bina. It's taking the Chachma. What's Bina? Taking Chachma and analyzing it, taking it to another level through the analyzation, understanding it. That's Torah Shebal Peh. We take the verses, the actual laws, that the finite laws there, meaning the finite words of the Torah, the verses, and we analyze it in the Torah Shebal Peh, and we have derivatives. That's the Torah Shebal Peh. And that's the baby nursing from the mother. As Rav Yeshua points out, the Torah, which is a product of Hashem's knowledge, is nursing from the mother. The Torah Shebal Peh is nursing from the Torah Shebechsav. We have a full shleimut, a full peace. That there's no longer any more being pulled towards chet, right? The red, the dam, but instead it's the nursing. It's being pulled. We have full teshuvah, we have full kapara. So what does that have to do with the bad, the atalef? It's very interesting. This is what he points out. The atalef, you think about it. You look through all the birds. It's the only flying creature that in science is a mammal is the bat. Right? The bat shares like a human being in these aspects of shalom that we were discussing. The Gemara tells us, well, before the Gemara's point, right? We know that the bat has this mating with each other. The way that they mate is more similar to a human. And the fact they do it at night, the Gemara tells us. And as far as the idea of a child nursing from the mother, so the Gemara tells us that the bat, right? And we know in science, the bat actually nurses. Unlike any other of the birds and creatures that lay eggs, the Gemara says the bat is the only one that lays eggs and nurses from the mother. And that's the expression of shalom, the fullness of shleimut, fullness of peace. Both in the aspect of the mating itself, that relationship, it's supposed to symbolize a harmony of two different aspects coming together, two different interests coming together in shleimus, as well as in the fact that it nurses, and you have this aspect of full shleimut, the chet completely turning into shelling into white snow, and having kapara, and being only driven towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, only towards God, not being driven towards sin anymore. And this marks the end of our 19 blessings that correspond to the different birds. So I just want to take a few moments there, a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes, to see if we could just summarize the 8 classes that we had over the last few months to have some level of takeaway. And Be'ezrat Hashem also, I mean to write up also a summary, and I will pass it out for anyone who's interested. I will get in touch and I'll let you know when that happens. Let's just go back to the beginning. I just want to point out before we begin with the corresponding of the birds to the different blessings. I think after this journey of going through this Sefer, Beis Tefillah of Yerushua Heller, we see that not just that there's a symbolism, there's a relationship between the birds and the blessings. But I would say another idea, a little deeper, and that is that we know, if the rabbis 2,000 or more years ago gave us this arrangement of the 19 blessings in our tefillah, it's clear, it's obvious that these 19 blessings are important and specifically important, necessary for the existence of us in this world and in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God. These are the 19 aspects that they pulled out that we need for our relationship with God. More than anything else. We call it codified. These are the ones that we need, and therefore they put it into these 19 blessings. And therefore, if we're looking for symbolisms of birds that symbolize and correspond to these brachos, I think we could say that really HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, put these 19 aspects of necessity in that relationship between man and God in these different these different creatures in the world. The aspects are there. We're supposed to look at these birds, and we're supposed to see the idea that we're mentioning in the bracha and the blessing. We're supposed to see it, and we're supposed to recognize, this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into nature. This is what we need. And we found throughout the whole journey here, there's really it's interesting, there's two different categories within the list. And that is, all these 19 non-kosher birds which we're going to work with, they're non-kosher birds. That means that there's some aspect of evil in them. Why are they not kosher? Why are they not able to be eaten by us? Because there's got to be some element of evil. But there was really, even within all that, there was two different categories. And that is, sometimes we find that there's actually, for example, the raven, right? We're going to say the raven was opposed to teshuvah, was opposed. He had different aspects of it that you look at the raven, you see, this is going in the opposite direction. We're not coming closer to God. We're moving away from God when you look at the raven. So that's an evil aspect, which is corresponding. You're supposed to look at it and say, I need to do teshuvah. You see it in nature. And then there was the whole other category of these birds, which actually, like the chasidah, the stork, and that was actually something positive. You saw the element of tefillah, Shemoneh Tefillah, as we discussed, in the chasidah and the stork. But as the different commentaries explain, there's got to be some element within it that's not correct. It has to be fixed, refined. And what we're doing when we're going through the blessings of the tefillah, we're coming closer to Kadosh Baruch Hu, to God, and we're refining those aspects of our relationship and the aspects of the nature. When we refine our relationship, we refine nature. And ultimately, we have the shleimah. After all that is going to be refined and fixed, we'll eventually, B'ezrat Hashem, come to the full Geulah. And at that time, the nature, when all these different aspects of evil exist, are going to be fixed and refined. That is a matter of introduction, but let's just go through the brachos with the birds. More of a summary. So we begin the Amidah with Avot. Right, the first of the blessings is, we call it Avot. It's the forefathers. What do we discuss? Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, we're praising God for the chesed, the kindness that He did for our forefathers and for all generations after. We discussed that Magen Avraham, right? It's the Kadosh Baruch Hu, God is the shield of Avraham. We mentioned the Medrash that God, Avraham picked Gehenim for his children for kapara, and God took that and said, no, I'm going to do Galut, which is a Chilul Hashem. Right? Avraham Avinu wanted what was best for Kadosh Baruch Hu's Shem, that it shouldn't be a desecration of God's name. And therefore Gehenim, as we explained, was going to bring that out. It's going to be a Kiddush Hashem. Kadosh Baruch Hu forsaked his own kavod, his own honor, and his own name in order to do chesed, kindness, to midah keneged midah to Avraham. That was Magen Avraham, and we said the Kadosh Baruch Hu did this by Yitziat Mitzrayim, when Kadosh Baruch Hu put the clouds, He put the clouds there between the Mitzrayim and the Jewish people. Mitzrayim were throwing and attacking, but Kadosh Baruch Hu took all the arrows and all the attacks into the clouds as if that was taking it within himself in order to protect his people, his children. And what was the first one? The Nesher, the eagle. Chazal tell us that the eagle, you look at the eagle and you see, for now we're going to be using identifications in English. It's not necessarily definitely correct because there's different opinions, but we're going to work with what works the best for our purposes. What seems the most, I would say, accurate according to what I've gone through, according to this book, the Sefer. So you got the eagle, which Chazal tell us, what does it do? It carries its young on its back, unlike all the other birds that carry below, because it says, I will take in the arrow myself when the man shoots the arrow into myself, as opposed to the child. Let me put the child on top of me. Of course, we said scientifically it's impossible, doesn't happen, but we discussed how potentially you could explain it, that you still see a level, very strong levels of protection, being protective of its young. And even when it lands, sometimes we find that the young ones are landing on it in the landing position. It trains it well. We have to review those classes from the beginning. We have the second and the third bracha. The second one is Gvurot, the praising of God's strength. And what was the corresponding bird? That was Niyah, which this one's very unclear what it is. Some type of owl, potentially. And the word Azniyah, Ibn Ezra tells us, we said, Azniyah is Lashon of Oz, strength. He discussed how there's two types of strength. There's the strength which is proactive, and there's a strength which is protective. And we explained how the owl is that level of Azniyah. The Oz is the protective one. That level of strength, being able to protect its space, etc. And the Kedusha is the Peres. The Kedusha is the third bracha, which was corresponding to the third of the Avos, Yaakov, and we praise the HaKadosh Baruch Hu of his Kedusha, of his holiness. But we said that we mentioned in the bracha and the blessing 3 times, Atah Kadosh, V'Shimcha Kadosh, U'Kadoshim B'Chol Yom, 3 times holiness. And the first one is Atah Kadosh, is Avraham Avinu, right? The first of the Avot, his relationship with God was Atah, it was Chesed, it was much, there was hashpa'ah. He was able to recognize the Kadosh Baruch Hu with Atah, single, right, you. And you have Shimcha Kadosh is more reserved. That was Yitzchak. There was Gvura. He recognized the Kadosh Baruch Hu as Gvura, and there was a fear. Shimcha, your name. I'm not going to say Atah. That's Shimcha Kadosh. And then Yaakov, we said, is that harmony, the balance between the two. That he took both the Chesed and the Gvura, these two elements of recognizing God, and he had this level of Emet. The Kedusha, Kadoshim is plural, both together. And we found the Peres, the bird or vulture, has this element of taking a little bit from here, taking a little from there. What is that? Right? It's known that it's called the bone breaker because it picks up bones and drops them to break them in order to get to the inside. So it breaks apart the Chesed of Avraham. It breaks apart the Gevurah of Yitzchak and takes from here, takes from there. That was one aspect we found in the Peres. We have in the Shmini, the Nesher Peres Azniyah, the order is switched as much as in Dvarim, it's Nesher Azniyah Peres, like we said, but in Shmini, it's Nesher Peres Azniyah Peres, which is Kedusha, goes between the Nesher of Azniyah because it's a product of both together, as we explained in that class. The next group of birds was really 4 of them, which all came and correspond to the 4th bracha. They're all the same family, the kite family, the da'ah, the ayah, and the ra'ah, and the dayah. In Shmini we have the da'ah and ayah, and in Dvarim it's the da'ah is, instead of being called the da'ah, it's called the ra'ah, and the ayah is there as well. And then there's a 3rd one which is added, which is the dayah. So these 4, da'ah, ra'ah, we'll use them interchangeably, ayah and dayah, all are 4 correspond to the 4th bracha, which is da'at, asking God for wisdom and knowledge. We had over here that there's 3 different aspects: chachma, bina, and haskel. So we have the chachma, bina, and haskel. We had the da'ah was the bird, which the Gemara tells us, the rabbis tell us, it's able to fly very quickly from place to place. And the idea, the symbolism there is that this corresponds to the dot. This is the knowledge. What was knowledge? Knowledge is something which comes about in two ways. Either HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, gives you the knowledge, right? God can just give you knowledge. You're aware of something. You understand something because God just gave it to you. It doesn't require any work. And that's what we find by Moshe Rabbeinu in Parashat Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him the Torah. Of course, there was a lot of work as well, but there's one element of just giving a matana, the Gemara tells us, a present. And that's that level of dat. And then you have the ra'ah. The da'ah is called the ra'ah in Sefer Dvarim, in Re'eh. That Re'eh, the Gemara tells us, is able to see very, very far. Right? It says an exaggeration, it could see a nevela, a corpse in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, when it's in Bavel, when it's in Babylon. And it's able to see very, very far. What's the idea of Riyah? The idea is, it's the reverse. The Riyah is being able to see, you just see. Right? You're able to see, it's all there. You don't have to put forth effort. That's the Ra'ah. The Da'ah is the opposite. It's going from place to place because the idea is that it has to put effort. You have to work and travel place to place to place. The Ayah, the very name of Ayah is Ayeh. Where is it? Because the Gemara tells us, it goes, it's very swift. It goes from place, it flies so quickly. It's hard to see it, how to pinpoint it. Where is it? And that's the idea of Binah. Right? The first one is Da'at. There's two levels of Da'at. There's Da'at which you know, there's Da'at which you work on. And there's Binah, which is the idea of analyzing. And that one, Binah, analyzation, it's very hard to hold on to it. You analyze, you go through a thought process, and then where is it? Right? It's easy to forget. That's the Binah. And the last one, which is the Daya, is Dai. The Lashon of Daiv, it's the idea of being precision, being precise. And we said Haskell is that idea of being exactly precise to get everything exactly right. Taking the Das and the Bina and the Chachma, putting it all together, you get the Haskell. The Shin is the three of the stems of the Shin. And we found in this kite family that different aspects of this, both in its ability to fly very quickly, being precise, as well as flying from place to place, and good eyesight. The last one we've got is the teshuvah. We ask God for teshuvah, which the corresponding bird in both lists is the orev, the raven. And we showed that the raven actually is in opposition to teshuvah. It's opposed. Number one, the raven turns, from the Gemara tells us, white to black. Not necessarily exactly white, but definitely not 100% black when it's born. And it's going from some level of gray to black, which is the opposite of teshuvah. We have different references of going from black to white. We become purified. We have the children. It's achzari. The parent is achzari on the children. The parent is upset and deals with the children in a harsh manner, even though it's also hard to understand on a scientific level what our actual observation. But this is what the Gemara tells us. In some element, it's achzari against its child, as Rashi says, while the child is still the color of white or gray. Once it turns black, so now more friendly. Again, exactly the opposite. Kadosh Baruch Hu, in the teshuvah process, when we're chotim, when we're sinners, so then there's a distance between us and God. That's when we're quote unquote black. When we turn white, then there's this ahava, there's this full love and relationship. That's when there's the relationship, when we're white. Exactly the opposite. And we discussed that a little more. We had different places where the raven actually personified chet, and that is, it brought out, it was actually essential and eventful in the story with the Nachash, causing the avodah zarah of the Nachash, thinking that they could become like God, as the snake tries to and does propose to Chava and eventually have them eat from the Eitz Hadas. And you have that different source in the Medrash that the raven actually was part and part with the whole story with Hevel and Cain, and it was involved in Gila Rayos, in immoral relations where it was mishamish b'teva. It made it in the teva when all the creations were forbidden to do so. We had the next bracha, the slicha, asking God for complete forgiveness. And the basi ana, that bird is the ostrich. What do you see? The ostrich, it has a screech. Gemara tells us the screech of the ostrich. From the main bakashot of slicha, when we ask God for forgiveness, one of the central parts of that is tzakas vidoy. When we're screaming out in vidoy, in confession, as based on the Rambam in Hilchot Shuvah, chapter 2, where it tells us that this ostrich goes over a kol yalala, this very screeching, and an achata there, it's constantly wailing. Now, of course, if you look at the ostrich in the zoo, they don't do that, but it's referring to the ostriches back in their hometown, they're back in the deserts, where they come from. Or at least certain types apparently do this. As well as the idea that the ostriches are found in makomot hashomimim, places which are desolate. And that's the idea of, right, it's a very also important in one coming to do a full level of teshuvah and asking for forgiveness. What's central to that? Recognizing, right, sitting, being silent, and recognizing, I sinned. You sit there, and there's like hishtamim, bewildered, like, how could I do such a thing? You just sit there. It's like a symbolism of desolation, of those makomot where the ostrich lives, deserts. Yeah, the next one is Geulah, asking God for redemption from our daily tzarot, our daily oppressions and challenges from anywhere really. And the next bird over here on the list, which corresponds to that, was a tachmas. That one I'm not going to translate or identify, but the Targum says the tachmas is vias chatifisa. It grabs. It's chomesh sharofos, right? It grabs. It attacks the other birds. The gozel otam. It steals from them. So that's the idea of, it personifies the idea of our oppressors coming and attacking. And we're asking God, we see that. We ask God, please protect us from such behavior. The next one is asking God for healing. Which one is corresponding to that? The next one on the list is the shachaf, some type of gull. We said maybe the seagull, which tears apart other birds. Gemara tells us that an expression of sickness is when one's flesh, right, an extreme expression of sickness, when the flesh, lo aleinu, the flesh actually peels. There seems to be in different places an expression of sickness. And the gull tears apart other birds. We said perhaps it carries disease. So it's also an expression of choli, of sickness. We have the next one, Berachat Hashanim, asking Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, for produce, growth, and parnasa in general. We should have sustenance. And the next one is the nates, the sparrowhawk. And he points out, the Ben Ezra tells us that this nates, why is it called the nates? Because nates there's many different translations, but nates, from the root of, he wants to say notza, feathers. And this bird, it molts. Many feathers, there's an annual molting. Some say it's annual. Now the question is, does the sparrowhawk really do that more than other birds? All birds molt, so it's a question doesn't seem to work so well with the observation. But the idea of molting, he wants to say, is similar to produce. Produce, there's a flower, and the flower falls off, and then the fruit comes. So that's the symbolism of the feathers coming off. We pointed out our own idea, perhaps. Nates also, is, first of all, nates also means a flower. In certain contexts, we also have nates means a spark, right? Nates hachama, when the first spark of light comes in the morning, that's called the sunrise. Nates hachama, we also use in Hebrew for energy, for, electricity. We have the nitzutz. And also in the Gemara, we have sparks from a fire. So the idea is, this sparrowhawk, this actually is observed, right? It darts. In its travel, it darts. You see that expression of yesh me'ayin, right? You have it, and then there's nothing there, all of a sudden you see it. So the idea is, this parnasa, similar to, right, fruit, which is the symbolism of parnasa, of sustenance. Even in our money, you see it in the fruit, in the produce. right? Nothing's there. Seeds. What's in a seed? And all of a sudden you see delicious fruit, delicious grain. So that's the idea of Berachas Shanim and the Nates. We have the next one, Kibbutz Golios. We ask Kadosh Baruch Hu for gathering our exiles. There's two elements in the bracha. One is the Shmiah, a tikkun on the Shmiah, to Kabe Shofar Gadol, the great shofar. There's some fixing in our hearing, that there's some issue throughout the exile, as we explained back to Adam Rishon, the sin of Adam Rishon, and that's being perfected with the Shofar Gadol. And then you also have the Sanes L'Kabez Kol Yoseinu, raise up the banner, which is perfecting the Riyah. There's some Riyah there's some imperfection which came back from the Eitz Hadat when they ate from the tree of knowledge. And we go through the Galut, which ultimately will end up with the Geula in a full perfection. We ask for both of the brachot, and which one is the bird that corresponds? The kos, which the Gemara tells us, the kos is unique. Some type of owl, seems. It's unique from all the birds that its eyes are in front of it, personifying the tikkun of the eyes, similar to man's eyes, as well as it has these cheeks, l'chayayim ka'odam, like man. Just like the eyes are in front of like man, also the cheeks are like man. So there's two elements: the cheeks corresponding to the tefillah, to the speech, which goes into the ears, the shmiah. You have these both elements which are being perfected in that bracha. The next one is the next five. It was a list of five: mishpat, minim, tzaddikim, rishleim, smichat, David. These five are all a journey, going expression of leaving the galut, right? Getting out of the galut, out of the exile, to full geula. And we said that there's two different tracks. There's the track of the Babylonian track, that exile, and there's our track. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to work with our track right now. And you'll refer back to the earlier classes as far as the first tract of the Babylonian tract, which is also really interesting. But our tract is following the list in Sefer Dvarim and Re'eh. So there we have the Mishpat, which one we're asking God for judges that are sincere and truthful. So which is the bird which corresponds to Yanshuf? We said Neshef. Yanshuf comes from the root of Neshef. Neshef is an expression of twilight. It's that twilight period between light and dark. And this is the long-eared owl, which comes out when? Specifically during twilight. That's when it comes out. And why is this relatable to Mishpat? Because our system, at least our historic system, of Reish Guluta, of Anshe Knesset Gedolah, Shoftim, after the times of the Shoftim and the Navi, right? After that, but after the exile, we set up the system of, we have leaders that judge. The judicial system within the Jewish people began right then by the Yanshuf period. What's the Yanshuf period? The Neshef, the twilight period. That's an expression that's symbolizing Bavel, because we said that exile was not as harsh as the exile of what we're going to say soon, Tin Shanmet, right, of Esav. That was much shorter, and it wasn't as harsh on us. So that's represented by the Neshef, Yanshuf, the twilight period. It's not completely dark yet. It's not light. We're in exile, but it's not completely dark. And we're referring back to that Zman, that timing. That's when our Mishpat began, the Amitat Mishpat. And we have the next one, the Minim, which you said is also, besides for apostates, also it's coming to ask God to destroy our actual enemies, the non-Jewish enemies. And which are our non-Jewish enemies in our exile? If we would say the long exile of the Esav. So it's the exile of Esav, of Rome. And that's the Tinshomet, the barn owl. The Lashon of Shin Mem, right? Nun Shem Mem, that it's desolation, complete destruction. We also said maybe Neshima, breath. Esav is relatable to the breath, that element of man. We have to look back to those classes. The tzaddikim in our list is the ka'at, is the pelican. We ask God for giving reward to the tzaddikim, the pelican. Why the pelican? Because the pelican had this interesting, unique behavior of spitting out. Right? It was able to spit out the fish. It swallows many fish on a constant basis, and it stores it within this pouch, and then it spits it out. And that's representing the spitting out of Israel, the land of Israel, spitting us out when we do immoral behaviors. And we've found in the Midrash that the specific, right, the one which, and also in the Psukim, really it's pretty clear in the verses that what's mostly identified in the Chataim, in the sins, which spits us out from the land, is the immoral zinut, the immoral relations. That aspect. And we said that tzaddikim is reserved, that name is reserved for those that fight that temptation, and they overcome it, of the immoral relations. And therefore tzaddikim is corresponding to the ka'as, the pelican. And the Yerushalayim, we ask God for building Yerushalayim, is the Rachamah, the Egyptian vulture. Perhaps the Egyptian vulture. And the Rachamah, the Gemara tells us, unbelievable, that this bird, it's, when you hear this bird, sharik, when you hear it screech or put out a noise, Mashiach comes. So it's literally within the nature of it to express Binyan Yerushalayim, right? In our Galut, Yerushalayim, as Rabbi Yeshua Heller pointed out, is put together with Mashiach, because they both come together. In the Babylonian exile, so they had the Binyan HaMikdash, they had the rebuilding of the Mikdash, they didn't have the full Gula, they didn't have the Mashiach. But in ours, we put it together. So therefore the Rachamah, which is basically announcing the Mashiach with its call, that one is actually able to correspond to Yerushalayim, and it's Michat David, when we ask for the full redemption from being under the government of the non-Jews. We want the full redemption, the kingdomship, which is based on the Torah, the Jewish people and the Torah. It's Michat David, Kiddush of David, that's the Shalach. Unbelievable, the Shalach, the Cormorant. And that Cormorant, we said that it symbolizes redemption. Why? Because it sweeps down, but very, very softly, right? It's not from a high position. It sweeps down, goes into the water, stays there for 30 to 45 seconds. It swallows these fish whole. It's not biting it. The fish are symbolizing the Jewish people within the waters, the deep waters of the non-Jewish people. And the Cormorant is a Kadosh Baruch Hu, symbolizing the Kadosh Baruch Hu going and redeeming us from those waters, whole, and wholeness. And it stays there 30 to 45 seconds within. It stays in the Galut. The Kadosh Baruch Hu is there with us in the tzarot, in our hardships, in our challenges. There. That's the Cormorant. That's Michat David. We move down from there to Shema Kolenu. Take all these tefillot and accept them. What's the corresponding bird? The Chasidah, the stork. The stork does chesed, kindness, with its chaverim. It does kindness with the other storks. We said that's like tefillah b'tzibor. When we do kindness with each other, how do we help our tefillot come up and be accepted by God? We have tefillah b'tzibor. We come together, and it brings it up at a much higher level, as well as the stork. The Gra tells us the stork does tefillah. It dips in the water after mating. It's a purification here. We know that our tefillot, in order to have that full ratzon, to have that full ritzui, to be accepted, we have to come into the tefillah, into the prayer, with that purification. As well as the third idea was very, very interesting. The Chasidah, the stork, has this unbelievable, unique way of being very, very precise in zmanim, in time. It knows when to migrate, exact. You could search it, and you'll see how they observed. It's such a precise system that it works with. And they stay together in that as well. That goes back to the first idea of chesed. And what do we see then in tefillah? In tefillah, we see that every single time during the week we have one tefillah. That's the way we accept our tefillot are accepted. We say those brachot, those blessings. And on Shabbat, we have different ones. On the Yom Tov and the Chag, we have different ones. Exactly this idea, Shema Kolenu. We move on to the Avodah. We ask God to accept our service and to bring back our service. Right in our exiles, we bring back the service of the temple of the Bet HaMikdash and to accept it. And which bird corresponds to it is the Anafa, the hot-tempered heron. Hot-tempered heron. And this is the opposite idea of Kadosh Baruch Hu, God, please, right, accept it, biratzon. And here we have exactly the opposite. He's hot-tempered. always bothering the other birds. Just because, it seems. You could search it for the observation, but it seems like more uniquely than other birds. And we have the Hodaya was so interesting. We got the Modim, thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? If you look at which of the blessings in the Tefillah, for myself, I would say, really touched the heart. We've got the Avot, and I don't know if we could say the most important, because they're all important, but we could say the Avot, the first one, the starting, the praise, Kadosh Baruch Hu's chesed with us. We have Shema Koleinu, God, take our tefillot. And we have the Modim, thanking God. What is thanking God? Recognizing, bending ourselves down, recognizing that everything that we have in our life is all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it takes off the pressure. The pressure is off. Because until we recognize that, we feel like we need to be in charge. We need to give ourselves, bring ourselves what is necessary for living. But we recognize it's often bitachon. We have that bitachon and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and God. We recognize that. What do we do with that? We recognize that God is taking care of us. We don't need to. We don't need to have that pressure. And we saw that the bird that corresponds to that idea is the duchifat. Duchifat, some type of wild hen, which they identify as hupu. The hupu. Now the hupu, we had two elements in it that correspond to it. First of all, it has this doubled over comb. And the idea there is you're doubling over, right? You're bending yourself over before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before God. Subordinating yourself. Second of all, we have this interesting behavior that instead of, like other birds, laying its eggs on these high, perched up roofs and high tree branches, it's very comfortable with laying the eggs, having their nest lower down. Seems like in the pasuk it says it on the ground. Perhaps it's not necessarily specific. It means close to the ground. The idea that Rabbi Segal was pointing out, based on the verse in Eov, rather, is that the idea is there's a security. It feels secure. I don't have to, I'm all good. I could put the eggs on the ground or near the ground. I don't have to worry about anything. But the reality is, now they are open, they're vulnerable to humans, to predators, all the other animals, as opposed to if they would be up on the treetop. And that's the idea of one who doesn't have the modim aspect, doesn't have that perspective, right? He feels secure. I took care of myself, right? He doesn't subordinate himself to God. So the reality is that there's a vulnerability there. His money that he has in his bank account, who said it's going to be there? What's going to happen? Who knows? We hope it is going to be there. But it's important, it's very, very important to recognize, as much as one should save money and one should secure himself in his life, but he also always recognizes always from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, always from God. And that's the idea we see. Don't be like the hupu, the duchifat in that way. And the last one, the atalef we had tonight, is the bat, personifying these different elements of shalom, of peace, both in its mating behavior as well as, and it's made up, similar to human, as well as in the fact that it nurses, similar to the mother who nurses her child. Baruch Hashem, we got through the different brachot. Anyone who has questions, I'm very happy to discuss. I would like to discuss it actually in order to deepen the ideas and to refine them, understand them better. As far as moving forward, if anyone has any ideas for topics that they would be interested in, I would be open to maybe start another series, or it doesn't have to be a series, it could be even a class or two, and even if it's not necessarily me, I could talk to my other colleagues in the Kollel, and we could potentially come up with something for Wednesday nights or any other night. Please be in touch. It was a pleasure. Thanks all for joining, and I will be in touch with you as far as the write-up.